are going to travel on this path of proving to ourselves the higher self, we need to define what we're looking for, have a clear destination in view. So we begin with definitions. What is meant by the higher self? The higher self is the essential spiritual being in each human being. However, unlike the personal self, which we had described, and the individual self, which is the thinker, which we also had described, it does not distinguish one human being from another. It has been called the universal self, the one universal self, the divine principle or spirit, the God within, and in Sanskrit, the term is used of Atma, which is the equivalent of spirit. Now, definitions, words are interesting, but analogies and correspondences can also appeal to our intuition and imagination. So if one were to compare this one universally diffused spirit with the sunlight, which shines equally on each and all, then the higher self is a sunbeam, which is essentially indistinguishable and inseparable ray of the one divine spirit. So the relationship between the sunbeam and sunlight is pretty much the same as the relationship, if we want to use that word, between our higher self and the universal self. It's one in essence, indistinguishable and inseparable. So what proof, what evidence, what logical reasoning can we assume to establish the fact of the higher self and the truth that the higher self, our essential spiritual being, is one with and inseparable from the universal spirit of all, which we may call deity if we wish. So let's begin with a premise, a place from which we can start our investigations. If the one universal spirit is the same in all beings, then we should be able to detect its presence within ourselves through looking within and through self-examination. So ultimately, we can use discussions and logical reasoning, but ultimately, proof of the higher self is an individual path of self-discovery. And yet, that path should be the same for each and all, each and every human being. So we want proofs that will not help not only us, but those who may not be trained in philosophical argument or discussion or even familiar with theosophy, but still have the capacity, because they are thinkers and capable of self-reflection and self-examination, to discover these proofs within themselves. So how do we learn? How do we all learn as human beings? Well, we learn by asking questions, for one thing, and we learn by contrast, as was pointed out. Light and dark, up and down, hot and cold. We learn all these things through the experience of opposites. And so too, we can use that principle. So we look within ourselves, or we ask the question, is there some essential basis of our being that is changeless in the midst of all the changing aspects of our nature? So looking within, we see we have a variety of feelings, a variety of intensity of those feelings, and those feelings react differently under different circumstances. And they defined the way our personality is, and it changes. We have a variety of different sensations and sensitivities to sounds, to colors, to heat, to touch, and the impressions we get also determine the way we view ourselves and our environment, our personality. We say we are a very sensitive individual, or we are very aware of the feelings of others. We sense that. Besides that, we also have the physical features of our bodies, which are changing all the time, in fact, but we can definitely recognize periods of our life when the features of our bodies change. And of course, we also have different opinions, different conclusions, different ideas, different theories, different thoughts. These are the most changing aspect of ourselves, and yet they in themselves define our personalities. And all these things are changing. So we say, well, if we take away all these changing aspects of our personality, if we take away the feelings, the march of ideas, the march of sensory impressions that changes our body, is there anything left which we can identify that doesn't change? We'll just leave that question hanging for a while for you to think about. So then we ask ourselves, looking within, is there some essential basis of our being that is indestructible and internal in its nature? In other words, whatever experience we've been through, the most shameful, hurtful, the greatest joy, whatever it is, and everything in between, is there anything in our nature that's been unaffected, not destroyed by all that variety of experience from the time we were born till the present day, and by extension, we can say into the future? Is there anything? Let's leave that question hanging for a while too. And finally, we say, is there some essential basis of our being that is and yet is not? Meaning that we know that it is, it hasn't changed, it hasn't been destroyed, but it can't be defined. It has no qualities, no attributes by which we can identify it. Now, we know what a rock is. We say it is because it has weight, it has texture, it has color, and we can throw it against something. It has sound, it has attributes. Same way with plants and animals. The scientists have a field day classifying all the different species according to their attributes. But is there something in our nature that isn't a species, so to speak, doesn't have any distinguishing characters, so it is not as a distinct being, and yet it is? Let's leave that question hanging for a while too. Because all these questions force us to look within and examine for ourselves and see what we're left. And we can only know it through our minds, our ability to be self-conscious and aware. And it can only come to us through our awareness, our consciousness, what we know. And when we do that, we say, the only thing that I can identify that is changeless, not disturbed, not destructive, has no features, is that awareness of identity. Now, we hate to use the term I, because the Spanish would say yo, and the Germans would say ich, so we'll say I because we're all English speaking, but it doesn't come through as that word I. It comes through as the feeling of individual self-conscious identity. Okay, I am I. I am that I am. And if we think about it, it's always there. It hasn't changed. Our thoughts change, our feelings change, our sensations change, but I am still always I. And it hasn't been affected. I was shamed, I was praised, I was congratulated, I was condemned, but it's still the same I, and that hasn't been destroyed, that's still there. And you can't weigh I, you can't say it has a certain color or texture or features. It's just I, it is, but it is not. Not only that, it's the same I in every human being. So it's the beginning by which we can prove to ourselves that there is something in our nature that is like that deific principle, one and inseparable, changeless, constant, and eternal. And we're practically proving to ourselves what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita in the second chapter about this, the spirit within cannot be destroyed by anything that comes to pass. The fire burneth it not, the water corrupteth it not, the wind drieth it not away. We're sure you're all familiar with the passage. But we can prove that for ourselves. But that's just the beginning. That's just the theoretical. We really have to get out there and apply it. He who lives the life learns the knowledge. It's like studying all the books on chess there are. That doesn't make you a grand master. You get a grand master by playing, you get to become a grand master by playing thousands of games and winning a certain number of them. You get into the Baseball Hall of Fame by getting on base 3 out of 10 times. But you got to do it. You got to get out there and practice, apply it. So we truly learn and realize by first identifying with that I that we've discovered. And what do we usually identify with? Well, we usually identify with the personality, all those changing things. I am this person with this complexion, with these physical features, with this amount of energy today, with these aches and pains, with these limitations, with these faults, with these virtues, with these abilities, with these skills. We identify with all that. And we sort of go into a crisis. One of those things which we really cherish about ourselves is disrupted. We go into what's called an identity crisis because we've identified with it. And of course, we also identify with ourselves as thinkers, thinking beings. But once again, we are dealing with those things which separate or distinguish us from other human beings. So we need to practice the idea of drawing back and identifying with that I, which is the same in each and all. And it's an interesting thing. What we think about, what we identify with, we become. We become one. The way we think, therefore we are. In that sense. But that's also a way on the path. Now we got to begin to meditate on it. We got to begin to dwell on it. We got to think about it, compare, contrast it with all the changing aspects of life. We dwell on it. We identify with it, we think about it, and the third step is we begin to act from that basis, not from the basis of personal separate beings, not from the basis of individual souls in evolution of different degrees, but think and act and speak and react to the best we can from the basis of that one self in each and all. He who lives the life knows the doctrine. So we've tried to point out a way, a path by which we can prove to ourselves through self-study, through self-discipline, as was suggested, a way to prove for ourselves through self-evident ideas that this higher self is a fact, and the truth that is one and identical with the divine self of all. And there is no difference between that self and the self of any other being. So we'll stop here and give you a chance to ask some questions and make some comments.